9 years ago, Damien Moretti lost the only thing that ever made him human. The woman he loved disappeared overnight. His enemies told him she had chosen to leave. He believed them. From the wreckage, he built the most feared empire on the East Coast, a man carved from silence and controlled fury. But one evening inside a Manhattan charity gala, a young boy with Damien's own dark eyes made the most powerful mafia boss in America forget how to breathe. The gala ran until midnight. That was the plan, at least. Damien Moretti arrived at 8:15, the way he arrived everywhere. 3 vehicles, staggered formation, no announcement. The St. Regis ballroom was already full when his security team swept the perimeter. Crystal chandeliers. A live string quartet working through something Damien couldn't name. Senators shaking hands with men whose names would never appear in any public record. The usual arrangement. He had come for one conversation, 40 minutes, a handshake with the Callaway Group, a quiet word about the Hudson waterfront contract, and he would leave before the dessert course. He had slept 4 hours in the last 2 days, and the idea of standing in a ballroom performing warmth for another 3 hours felt like a particular kind of violence. Table 7, his head of security, Luca, said into his ear. "Callaway's already seated." Damien nodded once. He moved through the room the way he always moved, without urgency, without visible attention, seeing everything. Politicians, judges, 3 faces he recognized from rival families, everyone performing the same theater of legitimacy. He was halfway to table 7 when he stopped. Not for any reason. He could immediately explain. There was a boy near the far edge of the room, maybe 8 or 9 years old, moving quietly along the charity display tables. Not a guest, not a server, something in between, helping, it seemed, straightening the framed photographs in a silent auction row. His dark hair kept falling across his forehead, and every few seconds he pushed it back. Same motion, every time. Left hand, 2 fingers. A hard, impatient sweep, like the hair had already lost the argument, and simply hadn't accepted it yet. Damien watched him the way he watched most things, without appearing to. The boy lifted a framed photograph that had tilted sideways, studied the angle with his head slightly cocked. Right, slightly right, not left, and corrected it with a precision that had nothing to do with being told to. He set it down. Moved to the next one. Damien felt something shift in his chest. Not suspicion, not yet. Something quieter and considerably more dangerous than that. The boy reached the end of the row and turned to look for someone. His expression in that half-second, focused, patient, scanning, was so familiar that Damien's next breath simply didn't come. He had worn that expression himself 10,000 times. The boy found what he was looking for. His face changed. Something warmer. He said one word to the woman approaching from the corridor entrance. "Mama." Damien lifted his eyes. The woman turned around, and 9 years dissolved in the space of a single heartbeat. Sophia Bennett. Her dark hair was pulled back. Her dress was pale green. She looked exactly as he remembered, and nothing like it. And both things were true simultaneously and impossible to resolve. She saw him the same instant he saw her. Her entire body went still. The particular stillness of someone who has rehearsed this moment 10,000 times and discovered, now that it was actually happening, that rehearsal was useless. Around them the string quartet continued playing. No one else in the room had noticed anything. But the boy, Damien's eyes pulled back to him involuntarily. Against everything rational, the boy was now looking between them with an expression of careful, quiet attention. The same expression Damien used when he already knew the answer, but was waiting to see if the room would tell him the truth. Damien had spent 9 years building walls out of rage and discipline, and the enforced certainty that she had chosen to leave. He had been very, very good at believing it. He was no longer sure he believed it at all. The quartet finished their movement. A soft wave of applause moved through the room. Neither of them clapped. Sophia's hand moved to the boy's shoulder, not to pull him away, to steady herself. Damien took one step forward. He had faced armed men in darkened rooms. He had sat across tables from people who wanted him dead and eaten his meal without looking up. He had built an empire on the principle that no situation, no person, no memory could move him faster than he chose to move. He took one step forward, and his chest felt like it was being taken apart from the inside. Sophia, her name in his voice, lower than he intended. She didn't run. That surprised him. She lifted her chin and something crossed her face. Not fear exactly, though that was part of it. Something older, something that looked impossibly like relief. "I can explain," she said. And Damien, who had not asked anyone for an explanation in 9 years, said the only honest thing he had said all evening. "I know you can." He didn't know it yet. Not truly. But standing there in the warm light of the ballroom, looking at the boy who carried his eyes and his impatience and his stubborn, careful way of holding himself, Damien Moretti began, for the first time in 9 years, to suspect that every single thing he believed about that night had been a lie. 9 years. 9 years he told himself she had chosen to leave, that she had looked at everything they had built together and walked away anyway. He believed it. He built an empire on top of that belief. But now she was standing 20 feet away, and the boy beside her, the same dark eyes, the same quiet, measuring stare, the same habit of checking every exit before settling into a room. Damien had faced armed men in darkened corridors without blinking, but one small boy with his own face made the most feared man in New York forget how to breathe. Is he really Damien's son? Did Sophia actually betray him? Or has someone been lying to him for 9 years? Follow now, and don't miss the next chapter, and drop a comment below. What do you think made Sophia disappear that night? The applause died. The ballroom resumed its careful performance, guests turning back to their tables, to their champagne, to their negotiations. But the small circle of floor between Damien and Sophia remained absolutely still. Luca shifted 2 steps closer without being told. Damien felt it, but didn't look. He couldn't look away from her. Sophia's hand stayed on the boy's shoulder, not gripping, using him to keep herself upright. The boy looked between them slowly. His expression had moved from focused calm into something more careful, more deliberate. He was reading the room the way children do when they've grown up around tension, quietly, without showing that they're doing it. Then he did something that Damien didn't expect. He stepped forward. He extended his hand the way someone had clearly taught him to, straight, confident, chin level. "My name is Ethan," he said. "Bennett." Bennett. The name landed in Damien's chest like something cold. He shook the boy's hand. He didn't know why. Some automated mechanism fired before his mind could catch up. And then he was standing there holding the hand of a 9-year-old boy, right his eyes and his jaw, and his particular way of holding very still when he was thinking. And the surname was Bennett, not Moretti. And Sophia was already pulling Ethan gently backward, already turning, already looking for the nearest exit with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been identifying exits for years. "Sophia," she stopped. His voice hadn't been loud. It hadn't needed to be. She turned back slowly. Her expression had closed down. The relief he thought he'd seen a moment ago was gone, replaced with something controlled and frightened and deeply, carefully composed. "Please," she said quietly. "Not here." "Then where?" "Damien, who is he?" The question came out steady. He was proud of that, distantly, the way you notice peripheral details when the central thing is too large to look at directly. His voice was completely steady. Sophia didn't answer. Ethan looked up at her. He noticed her hands, the way they'd gone rigid against her sides, the way she wasn't breathing normally. He looked back at Damien with those dark, familiar eyes, and Damien watched the boy file something away, the same way Damien himself had filed things away his entire life, quietly, for later. Then the light caught it. A small glint at the boy's collar. Silver, partially tucked beneath the neckline of his sweater, the chains likely twisted from an evening of movement. Damien's hand moved before he consciously decided to move it, not grabbing, just lifting the chain gently with 2 fingers, turning the pendant into the light. The Moretti family crest. Old silver. The kind cast before the design was updated. The kind that existed in exactly 4 places in the world, all of them accounted for, all of them in the possession of direct family. Damien had given one to his father the year before he died. He had kept one for himself. He had given one to his brother Marco. And he had given one, 9 years ago, to the woman standing in front of him. The night before she disappeared, he set the pendant down carefully against the boy's chest. The ballroom continued around them, the quartet, the champagne, the careful performance of powerful people being civilized. Damien looked at Sophia. She was already crying. She hadn't made a sound, and her face hadn't broken. But her eyes were wet, and she was looking at him the way people look when they've been waiting a very long time for the worst moment of their lives to finally arrive. "Tell me," he said. A single breath. Then, he's yours, Damien. The room didn't change. The chandeliers kept burning. Somewhere behind him, a senator laughed at someone's joke. The quartet resolved into a new movement, something in a minor key, as if the music had noticed what the guests had not. Damien stood very still. 9 years. He looked at Ethan. Really looked, the way he hadn't permitted himself to since the pendant confirmed what some part of him had already known from the moment the boy pushed his hair back with 2 impatient fingers. 9 birthdays. 9 Christmases. 9 years of a boy becoming himself in a world where his father didn't exist. 9 years of Damien building walls and empires and a reputation for ruthlessness, believing he was doing it out of strength, when the truth, it turned out, was that he had simply lost the only thing that had ever mattered and hadn't known where to look. I need to go. Sophia's voice was barely above a whisper. I'll explain everything. I swear to you I will. But not here. Not like this. Please. He wanted to say no. He wanted to tell her that she didn't get to choose the timing anymore, that she had already chosen the timing 9 years ago, and that the consequence of that choice was standing right here in a borrowed suit jacket with a Moretti pendant around his neck, and no idea what his father's voice sounded like. He said none of it, because Ethan was watching him, calmly, patiently, with eyes that already understood too much. Tomorrow morning, Damien said. You don't choose not to come. Sophia nodded once. She took Ethan's hand and moved toward the corridor. Damien didn't follow. He stood at the edge of the room while the gala continued around him, and he breathed, and he did not allow his face to show a single thing. 3 tables back, a man in a grey suit lowered his champagne glass and pressed send on his phone. The image had already transferred, sharp, clear, taken the moment Damien lifted the pendant from the boy's neck. A second photograph captured Sophia's face as she said the words. Across the city, a phone lit up on a mahogany desk. The man behind the desk looked at the photographs for a long moment. Then he set the phone down and reached for his drink. He smiled. So, Vincent Romano said quietly, to no one. The heir has finally appeared. His phone lit up again. A single line from the man in the grey suit. Target confirmed. Vincent took a slow sip and leaned back in his chair. He had waited 9 years for this night. He could afford to be patient for one more day. He found her at 11:40, a hotel 2 blocks from the St. Regis. Not the kind of place Sophia would have chosen for herself 9 years ago, when she had opinions about thread counts and natural light. This place had a narrow lobby and a night clerk who didn't look up from his phone. She had chosen it deliberately. She had chosen everything in her life deliberately for a very long time. Damien came alone. That was its own kind of statement. He left Luca in the car with instructions that meant, don't follow, in the language they had developed over 11 years of working together. Luca hadn't liked it. Damien didn't need him to. Sophia opened the door before he knocked. She had changed out of the green dress. She was wearing something plain now, dark, practical, the kind of clothing you could move in. Ethan was asleep in the room's single bed, one arm thrown over the pillow, his dark hair fanned across the white cotton. Damien looked at him for a moment before he could stop himself. Sophia watched him do it. Sit down, she said quietly. Please. He sat. She remained standing for a moment, her arms crossed. Not defensively, he realized. She was holding herself together, physically, the way you press a wound. Then she sat across from him and began. 9 years ago, she said. 3 weeks after the night you gave me the pendant, I found something. She had been in his office, not snooping. She had left her phone on his desk and come back for it after he'd already left for a meeting. The document was open on his laptop. She hadn't understood it immediately. Names, dates, amounts transferred. A list that meant nothing until she recognized one of the names as a man who had died the previous month in what everyone called a car accident. She had photographed the screen and left. She hadn't told Damien. She had gone to someone she trusted, a man she believed was outside the organization's politics, someone neutral. That was her first mistake. He came to me 2 days later, she said. He knew I'd seen it. He knew I was pregnant. I hadn't told you yet. I was going to tell you that weekend. And he sat across from me in a coffee shop on West 48th, and he put 3 photographs on the table. She stopped. You don't have to. Damien started. I do. Her voice was firm. You need to understand why. The photographs were of women. 2 of them Damien would have recognized. associates of men who had moved against the Moretti succession the decade prior. Both deaths had been ruled accidents. The third photograph was of Sophia herself, taken from a distance, standing outside the building where her sister lived. He told me the list I'd seen was a contingency plan, Sophia said. Anyone carrying Moretti blood who wasn't already inside the inner circle. Years that hadn't been sanctioned. He said the man behind it had been building it for years, and that if you found out I was pregnant, the document would be activated within the week. She looked at her hands. He said you would be killed alongside us, that they'd use the pregnancy as justification, that an unsanctioned heir created a succession crisis, and a succession crisis gave certain people everything they needed to move against you directly. The room was very quiet. I didn't believe him at first, she said. So he showed me more. Records, a name I recognized as one of your most trusted men, evidence I couldn't explain away. She exhaled slowly. I spent 48 hours trying to find another answer. There wasn't one. Disappearing was the only move that protected you and protected the baby. If I was gone, there was no pregnancy, no heir, no justification, no crisis. You could have told me, Damien said. His voice was controlled in the way that cost something. He told me if I contacted you in any form, the order would go out immediately. She met his eyes. I believed him. I had photographs of dead women, Damien. I had a name I recognized. I had a child growing inside me who had done nothing to deserve any of it. A breath. So I left, and I kept leaving every time I thought about coming back. Damien said nothing. I saw you, she said quietly. More than once. The benefit at Lincoln Center 4 years ago. The Callaway Foundation dinner last spring. I stood in the back and I watched you work the room, and I told myself you were fine, that you'd built something extraordinary, that you didn't need. Her voice broke for the first time. She steadied it. I told myself a lot of things for 9 years. I hated you, Damien said. I know. I built entire years on hating you. I know that too. She looked at him without flinching. I'm sorry. There is nothing I can say that is proportionate to what I took from you, from both of you. I know that. The silence between them was not comfortable. It wasn't meant to be. It was 9 years wide and full of things that couldn't be returned. Birthdays, first words, the particular way a child laughs before he's old enough to know that some things aren't funny. I don't forgive you yet, Damien said finally. I'm not asking you to. But I don't. He stopped, started again. I don't think you're the person I believe you were. For 9 years. Sophia nodded once. Her eyes were wet again. That's enough, she said. For tonight, that's enough. 4 floors above, in a service corridor with a direct sightline to the hotel room's window, a man lay flat against the concrete and pressed his eye to the scope. The curtain was partially open, 40 centimeters. Enough. He could see them both clearly. The woman, the man in the expensive suit, the child asleep in the background. He tracked slowly between the 2 adults, his breathing measured, his finger resting along the guard. He wasn't there to shoot. Not tonight. Tonight he was confirming the location, the layout, the routine. He pressed the transmit button on his earpiece once. All 3 are present, he said quietly. Awaiting instruction. The response came back in 4 words. Watch. Don't move yet. He settled in and waited. Below him, through 40 centimeters of open curtain, Sophia Bennett reached across the table and placed her hand over Damien Moretti's. He didn't pull away. He found her at 1140, a hotel 2 blocks from the St. Eight, Regis. Not the kind of place Sophia would have chosen for herself 9 years ago, when she had opinions about thread counts and natural light. This place had a narrow lobby and a night clerk who didn't look up from his phone. She had chosen it deliberately. She had chosen everything in her life deliberately for a very long time. Damien came alone. That was its own kind of statement. He left Luca in the car with instructions that meant don't follow in the language they had developed over 11 years of working together. Luca hadn't liked it. Damien didn't need him to. Sophia opened the door before he knocked. She had changed out of the green dress. She was wearing something plain now. Dark, practical, the kind of clothing you could move in. Ethan was asleep in the room's single bed, one arm thrown over the pillow, his dark hair fanned across the white cotton. Damien looked at him for a moment before he could stop himself. Sophia watched him do it. Sit down, she said quietly. Please. He sat. She remained standing for a moment, her arms crossed. Not defensively, he realized. She was holding herself together, physically, the way you press a wound. Then she sat across from him and began. 9 years ago, she said. 3 weeks after the night you gave me the pendant. I found something. She had been in his office. Not snooping. She had left her phone on his desk and come back for it after he'd already left for a meeting. The document was open on his laptop. She hadn't understood it immediately. Names, dates, amounts transferred. A list that meant nothing until she recognized one of the names as a man who had died the previous month in what everyone called a car accident. She had photographed the screen and left. She hadn't told Damien. She had gone to someone she trusted. A man she believed was outside the organization's politics. Someone neutral. That was her first mistake. He came to me 2 days later, she said. He knew I'd seen it. He knew I was pregnant. I hadn't told you yet. I was going to tell you that weekend. And he sat across from me in a coffee shop on West 48th, and he put 3 photographs on the table. She stopped. You don't have to, Damien started. I do. Her voice was firm. You need to understand why. The photographs were of women. 2 of them Damien would have recognized. Associates of men who had moved against the Moretti succession the decade prior. Both deaths had been ruled accident. The 3rd photograph was of Sophia herself, taken from a distance, standing outside the building where her sister lived. He told me the list I'd seen was a contingency plan, Sophia said. Anyone carrying Moretti blood who wasn't already inside the inner circle. Years that hadn't been sanctioned. He said the man behind it had been building it for years, and that if you found out I was pregnant, the document would be activated within the week. She looked at her hands. He said you would be killed alongside us, that they'd used the pregnancy as justification, that an unsanctioned heir created a succession crisis, and a succession crisis gave certain people everything they needed to move against you directly. The room was very quiet. I didn't believe him at first, she said, so he showed me more. Records, a name I recognized as one of your most trusted men, evidence I couldn't explain away. She exhaled slowly. I spent 48 hours trying to find another answer. There wasn't one. Disappearing was the only move that protected you and protected the baby. If I was gone, there was no pregnancy, no heir, no justification, no crisis. You could have told me, Damien said. His voice was controlled in the way that cost something. He told me if I contacted you, in any form, the order would go out immediately. She met his eyes. I believed him. I had photographs of dead women, Damien. I had a name I recognized. I had a child growing inside me who had done nothing to deserve any of it. A breath. So I left. And I kept leaving. Every time I thought about coming back. Damien said nothing. I saw you, she said quietly. More than once. The benefit at Lincoln Center, 4 years ago. The Callaway Foundation dinner last spring. I stood in the back and I watched you work the room, and I told myself you were fine. That you'd built something extraordinary. That you didn't need. Her voice broke for the first time. She steadied it. I told myself a lot of things. For 9 years. I hated you, Damien said. I know. I built entire years on hating you. I know that too. She looked at him without flinching. I'm sorry. There is nothing I can say that is proportionate to what I took from you. From both of you. I know that. The silence between them was not comfortable. It wasn't meant to be. It was 9 years wide and full of things that couldn't be returned. Birthdays. First words. The particular way a child laughs before he's old enough to know that some things aren't funny. I don't forgive you yet, Damien said finally. I'm not asking you to, but I don't. He stopped. Started again. I don't think you're the person I believed you were. For 9 years. Sophia nodded once. Her eyes were wet again. That's enough, she said. For tonight, that's enough. 4 floors above, in a service corridor with a direct sight line to the hotel room's window, a man lay flat against the concrete and pressed his eye to the scope. The curtain was partially open, 40 centimeters. Enough. He could see them both clearly. The woman, the man in the expensive suit, the child asleep in the background. He tracked slowly between the 2 adults, his breathing measured, his finger resting along the guard. He wasn't there to shoot. Not tonight. Tonight he was confirming the location, the layout, the routine. He pressed the transmit button on his earpiece once. All 3 are present, he said quietly, awaiting instruction. The response came back in 4 words. Watch. Don't move yet. He settled in and waited. Below him, through 40 centimeters of open curtain, Sophia Bennett reached across the table and placed her hand over Damien Moretti's. He didn't pull away. He didn't ask her permission. By midnight, 2 of Damien's men were already outside the hotel room door. By 12:30, a third vehicle had joined the convoy. By 1 in the morning, Sophia was sitting in the back of an armored SUV, with Ethan asleep against her shoulder, watching Manhattan slide past the tinted windows, saying nothing. She had made one attempt to object. Damien had looked at her with an expression that wasn't anger and wasn't negotiation, and said, "Someone was watching that window tonight." She hadn't said anything after that. The estate sat 40 minutes north of the city, a property that didn't appear in any record connected to Damien's name. Stone walls, iron gates, 12 rooms that had been swept for devices that morning for an entirely unrelated reason, which now felt like something other than coincidence. Luca had the perimeter staffed within the hour. 8 men outside, 2 on the roof, rotating pairs at every entrance. Sophia stood at the window of the room they'd given her and looked at the gardens below, where 2 guards moved in a slow, practiced loop between the hedgerows. She recognized the feeling immediately. Different house, different guards, same walls. "They're here to protect you," Damien said from the doorway. "I know what they're here for." She didn't turn around. "I've spent 9 years making sure Ethan and I never needed them." He didn't respond to that. She heard him move into the room, stop somewhere behind her. "He knows something is wrong," she said. "He doesn't miss things. I noticed. He's going to ask questions in the morning. Then we'll answer them." A pause. "He deserves answers." The word we sat between them like something neither of them was ready to examine. Sophia let it go and watched the guards complete their loop. Ethan asked us questions at breakfast. He sat at the kitchen island with both hands wrapped around a glass of orange juice and looked at Damien across the counter with the patient, systematic attention that Sophia had spent 9 years simultaneously nurturing and dreading. "Are we in danger?" he asked. Damien glanced at Sophia. She gave him nothing. "Potentially," Damien said. Ethan nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd already calculated. "Because of who you are?" "Yes." "And because of me?" The question was asked without drama, factually, the way Ethan asked most things. Damien set down his coffee cup. "Why would you think that?" "Because you didn't care about the pendant until you saw it on me," Ethan said. And then everything changed. He looked at his mother. "You've been preparing me for something my whole life. I think this might be it." Sophia closed her eyes briefly. "Eat your breakfast," she said. Ethan ate his breakfast. The attack came at 2:17 in the morning. No warning. No escalation. The first explosion took out the east gate and the 2 men posted there, and then the shooting started and everything became noise and motion and the practiced chaos of professionals who had done this before. Damien was dressed and moving before the second explosion. Years of sleeping and half-readiness, the occupational consequence of being the kind of man people wanted dead, meant the transition from sleep to action cost him less than 3 seconds. He came out of his room into a hallway already filling with Luca's voice through the comms, already calculating, already moving toward the east wing where Sophia and Ethan were housed. He was halfway there when he heard them, not screaming, not running, quiet, deliberate movement behind the wall panel at the end of the corridor. "Sorry." Sophia emerged first, one hand behind her holding Ethan's wrist, moving low and fast and completely without panic. She pulled the panel shut behind her, looked at Damien once and said, "Tunnel exit, south side of the property, past the wood line. I mapped it this afternoon." Damien stared at her. "Move," she said. He moved. Later, after the shooting stopped and the estate's surviving guards had contained the remaining threat, Damien stood in the south garden with blood on his sleeve that wasn't entirely his own, and watched Sophia sit cross-legged on the grass with Ethan speaking to him quietly, her hand on the back of his neck. The boy was shaken. He was 9 years old, and he had just moved through a firefight via a tunnel route his mother had memorized in an afternoon, using hand signals she had apparently taught him years ago for reasons she'd described at the time as emergency drills. He wasn't crying. Damien thought about that. They brought one man in alive. It was professional enough to say nothing for the first 20 minutes. Luca's methods were persuasive in ways that didn't require elaboration. At the 30-minute mark, the man's professionalism deteriorated. He whispered the name like it cost him something. "Vincent Romano?" The room went very quiet. Damien stood over him for a long moment, Then he straightened slowly and walked to the window and looked out at the dark property and the scattered positions of his remaining men. Vincent Romano had been with him for 11 years. He had stood at Damien's shoulder at 200 meetings. He had tasted Damien's food before Damien ate it. He had been present at every security briefing, every convoy route, every strategic conversation for over a decade. Damien thought about the hotel window last night, the sniper he'd sensed without seeing, the convoy routes that had never leaked. Until tonight, he thought about every conversation he'd had in the last 11 years in the presence of a man he trusted completely. His jaw tightened. If Vincent Romano had been the architect of everything, then every wall Damien had ever built had been constructed with a door already in it. And Vincent had been holding the key the entire time. 11 years. 11 years. Vincent Romano stood at his shoulder. Every meeting, every decision, every convoy route, every security briefing, every night, Damien rebuilt himself from the wreckage of losing her. Vincent was there, watching, knowing everything, and smiling. Now Ethan is gone. A boy who spent 9 years learning how to survive, taken in 60 seconds from a guarded estate. Damien has no margin for error, no room for the wrong move. And somewhere inside his own organization, someone is still feeding information to the enemy. The war isn't coming. It's already here. Save this story. The next chapter is the one you've been waiting for. Comment below, do you think Damien gets to Ethan in time? He didn't move against Vincent immediately. That was the hardest decision Damien had made in 11 years. And he made it standing in the South Garden at 4 in the morning, with the name still sitting in his chest like a piece of shrapnel. Luca wanted to move. 2 of Damien's captains, briefed quietly before dawn, wanted to move. The instinct of every man in Damien's organization was the same. You identified the threat. You eliminated the threat. You didn't wait. Damien waited. Because Vincent Romano had survived 11 years inside the most paranoid organization on the East Coast by being smarter than the men around him. And a man that careful, moved against too quickly, would simply vanish, taking everything he knew with him. Damien wanted everything. He built the case in silence over 4 days. He used men Vincent had never met. 2 accountants pulled from a legitimate subsidiary, a former federal analyst now on Damien's private payroll, a technology specialist who communicated only through encrypted channels and had never set foot in any Moretti property. What they found came in layers. The first layer was financial. 3 accounts in institutions with no American presence, funded through 11 years of small, irregular transfers that individually meant nothing and collectively represented a significant parallel income. The amounts weren't excessive. That was the tell. A greedy man takes too much. Vincent had taken exactly enough to be useful without being visible. The second layer was communication. Deleted, but not carefully enough. Fragments recovered from a server. Backup nobody was supposed to know existed. Timestamps that corresponded precisely to the nights things had gone wrong. A shipment intercepted. A witness who changed his testimony. A meeting that had been ambushed despite only 4 people knowing the location. 4 people, always including Vincent. The third layer was the surveillance footage from the St. Regis. Or rather, the 47 seconds missing from it. The gap covered the exact window during which someone in a grey suit had photographed Damien lifting the pendant from Ethan's neck. The deletion was professional. It was also unnecessary. No one would have reviewed that specific camera angle without already knowing what to look for. Vincent had deleted it out of habit. 11 years of covering tracks had become reflexive, and reflexes, Damien had learned long ago, were where careful men made their only mistakes. He showed Sophia the photograph on the 5th morning, a surveillance still. Vincent Romano entering a building on West 54th 11 years ago, 3 weeks before Sophia disappeared. Standard quality. Unremarkable, unless you knew what you were looking at. Sophia looked at it for 4 seconds. "That's him," she said. Her voice was completely flat. "The coffee shop," Damien said. "West 48th. She set the photograph down on the table and pushed it back toward him. He was thinner then. The beard is different, but that's him. She looked up. He sat across from me and put 3 photographs on the table and told me you would die within a week if I didn't disappear. A pause. He seemed sorry about it. That was the most frightening part. He seemed genuinely regretful, like he was delivering bad news he hadn't chosen. Damien looked at the photograph for a moment longer. 11 years. Vincent had been in the room when Damien received the news that Sophia was gone. He had stood beside him grave and steady and said, "I'm sorry, boss," with the particular sincerity of a man who meant it, because he had caused it, and causing it had cost him something, and that small private cost was the closest thing to conscience he possessed. Damien had been grateful for that steadiness. He understood now what he had actually been looking at. He didn't want power, Damien said. Not a question. He was thinking aloud, assembling the shape of it. If he wanted power, he would have moved against me directly years ago. He had the access. He wanted control, Sophia said quietly. Of you, of the organization. A man without family, without heirs, without anyone he trusted more than his closest advisor, is a man who listens to his closest advisor. Damien's voice was even, about everything. The room was silent for a moment. He built you, Sophia said. The version of you that existed for 9 years. He designed the conditions. Damien stood and walked to the window. Below, in the estate's courtyard, Ethan was kicking a football against the garden wall. One of the guards had retrieved it from somewhere. The boy played alone, with the same focused seriousness he brought to everything, adjusting his angle after each kick, making small corrections, improving. Damien watched him for a long moment. Then he turned from the window and began building the trap. It was elegant in its simplicity. A meeting, legitimate in appearance. Damien would summon his senior captains to the estate under the pretense of a security review following the attack. Vincent would attend, and in the 40 minutes before the meeting convened, Damien's men would have everything they needed in place. He told 4 people, Luca, 2 captains whose loyalty had been verified through methods Vincent knew nothing about, and the analyst. He told no one else. Vincent's response to the summons came within the hour. Confirmed, I'll be there by 7. Damien read the message and felt something cold and clarifying move through him. He had 3 hours. He spent the first hour finalizing the plan, the second reviewing the evidence with Luca, the third sitting with Ethan in the garden saying very little, watching the boy kick his football against the wall with patient, systematic precision. At 6:40, Luca appeared in the doorway. His face said everything before his words did. He's gone, Luca said. And Ethan, Damien was already standing. Ethan isn't in the garden. The football sat against the wall where the boy had left it. Perfectly still. One of the guards was on the ground near the east hedge, breathing but unconscious. The garden was empty. Vincent Romano had moved first. Sophia's scream didn't sound like a scream. It was too controlled for that. A single, sharp sound cut off immediately. The way someone sounds when they've trained themselves not to fall apart, and the training almost holds. She was in the garden before Damien reached the doorway, on her knees beside the unconscious guard, her hands moving across the hedge line, the wall, the ground, looking for something. Sophia, he leaves signs, she said. Her voice was absolutely focused. When we practiced, when we ran drills, I told him if he was ever taken, he should leave markers. Small ones. Things that looked accidental. She was moving along the base of the wall, her fingers trailing the stone. He listened to everything I ever told him. He always listened. Damien crouched beside her. He didn't tell her to slow down. He didn't tell her they had people for this. He looked at the wall where Ethan had been kicking his football, and he looked at the ground, and he looked at the hedge, and he made himself see it the way the boy would have seen it, 9 years old, taken fast seconds to act. What do you leave behind that looks like nothing? There, Damien said. 3 stones near the base of the east hedge, arranged in a line that the casual eye would read as debris, but the line pointed precisely, deliberately, northeast. Sophia made a sound he'd never heard from her before. Relief and grief at the same moment, indistinguishable from each other. That's the direction symbol, she whispered. I taught him that when he was 6. They found 2 more markers within the hour. A torn strip of dark fabric caught on the fence at the property's northeast corner. Ethan's sweater, a piece of it positioned too precisely to be accidental. And beyond the fence line, on the road that ran toward the old industrial district, a single shoe scuff in the gravel shoulder that faced northeast and stopped, suggesting a vehicle. Damien's analyst had the traffic camera footage within 20 minutes. A grey panel van, plates obscured with mud that was too evenly distributed to be natural, heading northeast on Route 9 at 6:51. Damien stood over the analyst's screen and felt something he had no language for. His son had been taken from him twice. Once before he'd known he existed. Once 5 minutes after he'd started to understand what it meant to have him. He was not going to lose him a third time. Sophia was sitting at the kitchen table when Damien came back inside. She had her hands flat on the surface in front of her, pressing down, and she was staring at nothing with the expression of someone engaged in a private war between function and collapse. "This is my fault," she said. "No. If I had told you sooner, Sophia." He sat across from her. "Vincent Romano spent 11 years inside my organization. He had access to everything I owned, every plan I made, every security measure I implemented. He took my son from a guarded estate in broad evening while I was 40 feet away." He held her eyes. "That is not your fault. That is mine. I should have moved faster." She looked at him for a long moment. "He left us 3 markers," she said finally, "in under 60 seconds, while being taken by professionals." Something crossed her face, pride so fierce it looked almost like pain. "He was 6 years old when I first taught him the direction symbol. I wasn't even sure he remembered." "He remembered everything," Damien said quietly. "He remembers everything." She exhaled. "He's been preparing for this since he was old enough to understand that our life wasn't normal. He never complained about the drills, never asked me to stop. He just—" Her voice broke slightly. "He just learned." Damien thought about a 6-year-old boy practicing direction symbols in whatever small apartment Sophia had been hiding in that year. Practicing hand signal, learning to read exits, learning to move quietly through spaces while his mother timed him, learning to survive a world he'd been born into without consent. The thing in his chest that had been building since the gala tightened into something he recognized, finally, for what it was. Pride. Uncomplicated and enormous and entirely new. "You raised someone extraordinary," he said. Sophia pressed her hands harder against the table. She didn't trust herself to respond. Damien made 4 calls. Within 90 minutes, every loyal captain in his organization had been contacted, verified, and deployed. The men whose loyalty Vincent might have compromised were sidelined without explanation. What remained was a smaller force, tighter, faster, and operating with the particular focus of people who understood that this was no longer about territory or business or the careful management of power. This was a child. Damien's child. The word still felt new in his mouth. He used it anyway, in every conversation, without hesitation. "My son." 2 words that had existed in the world for 9 years without him knowing it. He was not going to be careful with them now. The convoy moved northeast at 8:15. The warehouse had been abandoned for years. A former textile facility near the river, the kind of building that appeared on no current registry and attracted no attention. Damien's analyst had narrowed the location from camera footage and cell tower data in under an hour. Damien went in with 6 men. The building was dark and smelled of rust and standing water. They moved through the ground floor in silence, clearing rooms, communicating in gestures. In the 3rd room, they found Ethan. He was sitting on a wooden crate, his remaining shoe still on, his expression controlled in a way that was so familiar it stopped Damien in the doorway for one involuntary second. The boy looked at him and something in his face shifted. Not fear dissolving, but relief, carefully managed, the way Sophia managed everything. Then Damien heard the hammer click. "I was wondering," Vincent Romano said from the shadows behind the boy, "how long it would take you to find us." The gun was at his side, not yet raised. A conversation still, for the moment. Vincent looked older than he had at the security briefings. Or perhaps simply different, now that the performance had ended, and Damien could see the face beneath it. "Hello, Damien," he said. "Put the gun down, Vincent." Damien's voice filled the room without effort. 6 men behind him, positioned, waiting. Vincent would know the count. Vincent always knew the count. The gun stayed at his side. "I want to talk first," Vincent said. "I've earned that much. 11 years. I think I've earned 10 minutes. Ethan sat on the crate between them, very still, his eyes moving from Damien to Vincent and back with that systematic attention that Damien had stopped finding remarkable because it was simply who the boy was. He was reading the room, calculating, waiting for instruction. Damien met his eyes for 1 second and gave the smallest possible nod. "I see you. Stay still. I'm here." Ethan's shoulders dropped a fraction. "Talk," Damien said. Vincent talked. He taught the way men talk when the performance is finally over, and the only thing left is the truth, which is its own kind of relief. After 11 years of maintenance, he had joined the Moretti organization at 32, ambitious and precise, and already certain that the men above him were wasting what they had. He had watched Damien's father run the empire with sentiment, loyalty given too freely, power distributed too broadly, decisions made with the heart when they should have been made with the mind. He had waited. When Damien took over at 28, Vincent had believed things would change, and they had. Damien was sharper than his father, more disciplined, more strategic. But then Sophia appeared, and Damien changed in ways that Vincent hadn't anticipated and couldn't control. Softer in the private hours, distracted in ways that compounded, making decisions colored by the future he was building with her rather than the empire he was supposed to be protecting. "You were becoming someone I couldn't predict," Vincent said. "A man with a family is a man with leverage points. A man with an heir is a man with a succession problem waiting to happen." He paused. "I didn't want you dead, Damien. I want you to understand that. I wanted you manageable." "You murdered people," Damien said. "I removed complications. They had names. Everyone has names." Vincent's voice remained even. "The empire has survived 30 years because someone was always willing to make the decisions that sentiment wouldn't allow. I made them. For 11 years I made them, and the organization grew, and you got the credit. And I accepted that arrangement because the work was what mattered." He looked at Ethan, and then she turned up pregnant, and I understood that everything I'd built was about to be handed to a child I hadn't sanctioned. And I made another decision. The warehouse was silent except for the river sound coming through the broken windows high on the north wall. "You took 9 years from my son," Damien said. "I protected the empire. You protected yourself." Vincent smiled slightly. Those were the same thing. He raised the gun. What happened next took 11 seconds. Vincent's arm came up, and Ethan was already moving, off the crate, left, low, the way Sophia had drilled him, away from the line of fire toward the nearest structural cover. The movement pulled Vincent's attention for the fraction of a second to cost him, and Damien crossed the distance between them faster than a man in an expensive suit had any right to move. He hit Vincent's gun arm at the wrist. The shot went into the ceiling. The guns skittered across the concrete floor, and then they were down. Both of them, and 11 years of careful distance, collapsed into something immediate and physical and without strategy. Vincent was good. That had never been in question. He was 61 years old, and he was good. And he fought with the particular efficiency of a man who had survived long enough to know exactly where to hurt someone. But Damien was 38 and had been carrying 9 years of something that had no other outlet. It wasn't clean. It wasn't quick. When it was over, Vincent was on the ground and Damien was kneeling over him, breathing hard, and the 6 men behind him had their weapons up, and Ethan was pressed against the far wall, safe, standing straight, watching his father with those dark, familiar eyes. Sophia arrived 4 minutes later with Luca's second team. She came through the warehouse door and found Ethan first, crossed the room and pulled him against her without a word, her face buried in his hair, her shoulders shaking for exactly 3 seconds before she made herself stop. Ethan held on longer than she did. Over his shoulder, she found Damien's eyes. He was still breathing hard. There was blood on his jaw from a cut above his cheekbone. He looked like a man who had just finished something that had been unfinished for 9 years. She held his gaze across the warehouse floor. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The commission meeting took place 6 days later. Damien laid the evidence across 4 hours. Financial records, communication logs, surveillance, reconstruction, testimony from 3 men Vincent had used and discarded over the years, and who had been waiting, it turned out, for someone to ask the right questions. The case was not presented emotionally. It was presented the way Damien presented everything, precisely, completely, without gaps. The commission deliberated for 20 minutes. Vincent Romano's remaining allies were dealt with in the ways that such things were dealt with, quietly and finally, over the following 72 hours. 2 men took plea arrangements with federal prosecutors whose interest in the Moretti organization suddenly aligned with Damien's own interests in ways that benefited everyone willing to be pragmatic. It was over. Not cleanly. Nothing in this world ended cleanly, but it was over. The courthouse steps were gray and wide and caught the morning light at an angle that made everything look slightly more permanent than it was. Damien had filed the legal paperwork 4 days earlier. Acknowledgement of fraternity. Name addition. The kind of documents that existed in the legitimate world and meant something there, independent of everything else he was. Ethan Moretti. The boy had read the paperwork carefully, the way he read everything, and then looked up and asked one practical question about whether he would need a new school ID. Damien had laughed for the first time in longer than he could remember. They came down the steps together, Sophia on his left, Ethan between them, the boy's hand in his. Around them, Damien's security maintained their perimeter with the practiced invisibility of long experience. The city moved past them, indifferent and continuous, the way cities always did. Ethan looked up at him. "Are we going to have to run again?" he asked. "Ever?" Damien stopped on the second step from the bottom. He crouched down in front of his son. His son. The words still new enough to feel like something, and looked at him at eye level for the first time without urgency or crisis or the compressed attention of a man managing a situation. Just a father. Just a boy. Ethan's dark eyes were steady and patient and waiting, the way they always were. "Not anymore," Damien said. "No one will ever take us away from each other again." Ethan studied him for a moment with that careful, systematic attention. Then he nodded once, satisfied, the way he nodded when he had verified something he needed to be certain of. And he kept walking. Damien straightened and fell into step beside Sophia, and she took his hand without looking at him. A quiet, unremarkable gesture, the kind that belonged to people with a long history and, now, a future to put it in. The empire still existed. It would always exist. There were men who needed managing, decisions that needed making, a world that ran on arrangements most people preferred not to examine too closely. But for the first time in 9 years, Damien Moretti walked away from a courthouse not as the most feared man on the East Coast, just as a father, just as the man who had finally, after everything, gotten his family back. This was never just a mafia story. It was the story of a father who didn't know his son's name, a woman who gave up everything she loved to protect the two people she loved most, and a boy who spent 9 quiet years preparing for the moment his father would finally come. Ethan left 3 markers in under 60 seconds while being taken by professionals. He was 6 years old when his mother taught him the first one. He never forgot. If this story stayed with you, tag someone who needs to read it. Like it, save it, and drop a comment with the moment that hit you hardest, because the next story is already coming. And if you thought this one was intense, you have no idea what's next. Are you ready?